Most have heard about evolution, but really, what is it? Today we will be going over the intricate processes of evolution and how it has led us to where we are today. Evolution itself is a theory. Formed to explain a phenomena, a theory is a principle supported by evidence. Some attempt to debunk evolution as a legitimate teaching because it is a theory. However, in scientific terms, theories are an explanation, not just a hunch. Evolution is described as the process by which different kinds of living organisms are thought to have developed and diversified from earlier forms during the history of the Earth. A quote by Oxford Languages. The process of evolution is made possible by four main factors: natural selection, mutations, gene flow, and genetic drift. An example of this being the evolution of fish fins, as shown in my drawing. Let's start by talking about natural selection. Environmental threats such as predators, changing weather, or lack of food sources enhance the chances of survival of an organism with specific biological characteristics. This leads to traits better fit to the environment, increasing in frequency generation to generation. This is better known as natural selection. Biological characteristics are expressed because of DNA. DNA is the body's genetic code and found in all living organisms. It forms sequences responsible for production of proteins or parts of proteins in the body. Proteins establish all physical characteristics as well as regulate cells, tissues, and organs. Each DNA sequence is a gene. Genes are transferred from parent to offspring and determine a characteristic of said offspring. This is why we often see children looking like their parents. Changes in genetic material are known as mutations. Mutations can be large or microscopic changes in any species. For example, some human mutations are the growth of hair on knuckles, dimples, and lactose tolerance. A single mutation can have a substantial effect on a species. More often than not, evolutionary change happens with the accumulation of many minor mutations. Another important factor in a species' survival is gene flow. Gene flow is the transfer of genes via reproduction between two species. Gene flow brings about genetic variation and can lead to positive adaptations. So far, this explanation of evolution may lead you to believe that evolution is a perfect process. However, this is far from true. Luck plays just as much of a role. A good example of this is genetic drift. In each generation, a genetic trait may be more prevalent due to chance. These genes may not provide any advantages and may in fact bring about negative consequences for the species. When any specific feature arises due to gene flow, genetic drift, natural selection, and/or mutation, we call this adaptation. Adaptations help an organism survive and/or reproduce. Adaptations have many benefits, some being an increase in resources due to a new anatomical feature, camouflage from predators, or a protein that functions better at body temperature. While not all adaptations are positive, to persist in a population, they must aid in either reproduction or survival. Now let's discuss micro and macroevolution. Microevolution is evolution on a small scale, such as allele frequency that occurs from one generation to the next. For example, over time some insects have adjusted to pesticides. As pesticides are applied to a plant, a small number of insects with a resistance to said pesticide will survive while the rest die. The surviving insects now have a chance to reproduce and transfer that resistance to their offspring. This leads to an increase in the next generation's survival rate. Unlike microevolution, macroevolution is the evolution on a large scale. It is all-encompassing history of all living organisms and occurs after hundreds of thousands of generations. An example of macroevolution relevant to the human species was the transition from our ape ancestors to who we are today. To recap, evolution is any change in heritable traits. Any living organism can reproduce. However, evolution is imperfect and can change a species for the better or for the worse. When a trait is overall positive, it will most likely be passed on to the next generation, creating an adaptation in the population. Gene flow, genetic drift, natural selection, and mutation can add up to dramatic changes in living organisms. This is the story of evolution.